way is because we know that many of our Black programs get started by survivors of domestic violence. And those survivors feel obligated, feel called to almost a ministry of starting services for domestic and sexual assault victims. And as they provide those services, many times they take their own paycheck. They take their own limited resources to open up organizations to share with other women who are experiencing what they're experiencing or what they did experience. And so it's real critical that for us to be able to have the necessary resources that we begin immediately, that we start by opening up programs and adhering to those standards that she mentioned, that our Miss Jennifer mentioned. So this afternoon, to close this out, I have two programs, two federally funded programs that I'm going to talk about. And they are the FIPSA, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Administration, and also OVW, the Office on Violence Against Women. These are two federally funded entities that it provide resources to local communities, including culturally specific communities, to do the services that we do. Now, there are many different ways to have funding. So we're not trying to imply that those are the only two ways that you should have funding. And we hope to have a conversation later in which we're going to query you and see how are you being funded. In fact, in our chat, if you could let me know how many of you are funded by federal grants, operating by federal grants. And if you're not operating by federal grants, who is providing the funding for you? Are you getting funding from your church that may be giving you space and opportunity to do so? A foundation, Verizon Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, Move, or any other ones? There are many different foundations. So are you getting federally funded by those organizations? So please, in the chat, if you would, just let us know, how are you getting the resources you need? Well, the two prominent ones in the federal government for handling issues of sexual assault and domestic violence are the FIPSA program, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Administration, and the Office on Violence Against Women, OVW. I'm going to share my screen with you now as we talk a little bit about both of those funding sources. So I tried this yesterday and it didn't all quite work, but we think it's going to work today. That's what I want to open right there. And I am going to make it a slideshow. I'm not sure why it's not turning into a, there we go, I hope. Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone is able to see me. Jennifer, since I can see you, are you able to see my screen? Thank you. And do you have the full picture of my screen so that you can see the presentation, or are you seeing everything that's on my screen? Because I see more.
Everything.
Okay, we don't want that. Sorry about that.
I mean, I see all your slides.
You see my, oh, all at the bottom and everything too? Okay. So I'm just trying to show one at a time. I'm not sure what's in that. So let's do this. And for whatever reasons, it's not giving me to play from start.
How about play from?
Yes.
There we go.
There we go. All right, very good. And do you see the next slide also? Is that on there? Or you just see one? Thank you very much, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Right. So somehow we're not at the beginning. Let's see if we can get to the beginning. All right. So for Ujima, we're going to talk about, as I said before, two different grant programs. And the first one we're going to talk about is going to be FIPSA, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. And FIPSA was actually has been around for a long time. And it was codified or brought into law in 1984. And it was intended to provide services for victims of domestic violence. So really the movement started back in the 70s on addressing issues of domestic violence in our community. And as we were addressing those issues, we quickly realized that we needed federal resources in order for us to comprehensively support victims of domestic violence. And so when FIPSA started, it started as looking just specifically at the issue of what they called family violence. But family violence is really synonymous with what FIPSA would also then call domestic violence. So as we define domestic violence, then FIPSA is still holding to that definition. And the FIPSA grants are meant to support not only states, but also territories and tribes. And then as they're providing this support, that a lot of the majority of the money that's from FIPSA is being used to take care of issues of shelter for survivors and then services for survivors. And those are two things. And that shelter can offer services within that concept, or there could be outside services that are provided as well. And what FIPSA wants to do is to, when you look at applying to them, or if you look at what's being applied by them, is that their purpose is to increase public awareness. So this is a primary prevention type of activity that can be done if it's requested in that particular proposal, but they're increasing community awareness about the extent of domestic violence, about resources that are in the community for us. They're providing immediate shelter and supportive services for individuals. FIPSA also operates or provides money to the national hotline, and several different funding sources provide money to the national hotline, but FIPSA is just one of those sources. And then FIPSA also provides technical assistance for people who receive grant funds and communities who are trying to address the issue of domestic violence. And again, to apply for FIPSA, you are going through your state or your tribe, because FIPSA is actually, this pot of money, it comes from what they call a formula grant, and it goes to states. All states apply for it. They're entitled to it, and they're entitled to it under a formula grant, what's called a formula grant, which means it goes by how many people live in your state, the size of your state, several different variables, and they put that together and they say, Florida gets X amount of money because it's so big, or California, in your case, gets X amount of money because it's so big, but Rhode Island may get a much smaller pot based on its population and size. And part of FIPSA then has this chart that's available for you, and we can make sure and post this so that you can have it separately also. But it also tells you how appropriations are given for FIPSA. So no less than 70% of the money in FIPSA's formula grant goes to states and territories for that purpose of providing those services and shelter. And no less than 10% of the appropriation will go to Native American Indian tribes. No less than 6% of the appropriation will go to national resource centers that provide that technical assistance we talked about earlier. And no less than 10% will go to statewide coalitions, so that you have I'm sure all of you are familiar with state coalitions that you can collaborate with, or that provide services and technical assistance for programs within their state. And no more than 2.5% of the appropriation is used for the administration. So it even dictates how much money can be taken out of this FIPSA pot for administering the funds in Washington or through FIPSA administration. And then there's another program in FIPSA as well called the Domestic Violence Prevention Enhancement and Leadership Through Alliances Delta, and $6 million is authorized for that. And then the national hotline gets $3.5 million. So as I said, when we see it's how it's broken out here, we can see specifically how PHPSA money is spent. And it's distributed to all of these communities, and it's intended to ensure that all communities have accessibility to all of those funds. And so this chart that PHPSA has really breaks out for you so you can see Asian population, how much through the PHPSA formula grants is going to helping to serve that population. And then the white population, which you see is the highest, with 45.7% of the funds being used to serve that population. And the black population at the bottom, or the African American population, we see 17.7% of those funds. And as you go around, you can see all of them. And that's what is being reported by the programs that have been awarded the funds. And this is 2017 documentation. And as we said, no less than 70% can be used for temporary shelter and related supportive services. So within that 70% though, 25% of those funds, as they're allocated to subgrant recipients and to others, must be used for services. So you can't apply all your money to running shelter. You have to ensure that in addition to having a shelter, that you have money to provide services for those individuals. And PHPSA services assist in the development of safety plans, supporting active efforts to victims to make decisions about ongoing safety and well-being. They provide for group and individual counseling. They provide for training and technical assistance, outreach, community awareness on domestic violence, and they also provide funds to increase accessibility of those services. We also have really continued as we worked on many different projects and policies and legislation, and trying to ensure that we have funding for culturally and linguistically appropriate services. And PHPSA also provides services for children exposed to domestic violence. It provides services for advocacy and case management service and informational referrals that can be given based on the needs of the population, for job training, a lot of different things that if you're looking at having funds to that you get from the state, as the state administers all of these funds. If you're looking at funds, these funds go out on a regular basis, and the states are supposed to notify the community when they're handing out these funds. And so what you want to do is make sure you know who your PHPSA state administrator is, and you get to know that person. There's a list on the website, and we can also post that for you, of all the PHPSA state administrators. And if you know that person, you develop a relationship with them. You let them know what it is that you're doing in the community. So when those funds become available, then you can be there to say, we also want to tap in on those funds, those that are listed specifically for culturally specific services, and those that are just listed for the general population, because funds for the general population still includes the Black community. You can provide parenting services, and as we said before, prevention services with outreach as well. Non-residential supportive services can include victim advocacy, crisis counseling, safety planning, support groups, information and referral, legal aid, housing assistance, and other services. So just because you don't have a shelter does not mean that you should not be eligible for getting PHPSA funds through your state. Having said that, I'll also let you know that some states have decided that the majority of their funds, or if not all of their funds, require core services. And part of that core service perspective is that you must have a shelter. And then the shelter must provide those other core services. So if that's your community, then you really need to talk to your FIPSA state administrator to see how, there can be other ways that you can tap into those funds. And state administrators have to do a community planning every year on how they're going to document how they're going to distribute their FIPSA funds. So that's something else that you want to know from your state administrator. How are the funds being distributed? How did you come up with this formula? What are you doing? And how, if ever, can it be changed? What are the possibilities of getting other programs included in as providing those services? The Delta program that comes out of FIPSA also, it's had pilot programs that have gone on, and Delta actually stands for Domestic Violence Prevention, Enhancement, and Leadership through Alliances. And this is more of a collaboration that it's through actually and administered by CDC through HHS. So HHS gives CDC, what does that stand for? Center for Disease, CDC, Disease Control, something like that. CDC, but the federal department on that.
Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Thank you very much. I knew the Centers for Disease Control, and Prevention. So
yes,
Delta,
ma'am.
Thank you very much. Delta funds come through CDC. And in 2018, Delta started its Delta Impact program, and it's currently funding 10 states around our nation as they're looking at supporting community response teams and decreasing domestic violence risk factors and increasing protective factors. Now, I think that's really great to note as we talk about that, because as we're talking about and applying our funds that we have and trying to address the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault in our communities, it's really important that we know what are the risk factors for domestic violence in the Black community, and what are those prevention strategies that we can engage in that would help to minimize all of those risk factors. So it's a matter of ensuring that we're looking at protective factors. What is it that the Black population would consider protective factors that would help them to be resilient, to overcome the violence that they've experienced? What are the protective factors that's going to help them to overcome the historical positioning that we talked about yesterday that has happened to them? And so as we look at providing those things in an evidence-based strategy, then we're more likely to be able to overcome the risk factors that our community is witnessing and has the potential to endure. Risk factors do not necessarily mean that those are things that are going to happen. So protective factors are things that we want to minimize those risks. And again, with the State Domestic Violence Coalition, then we have FIPSA that provides funding there. And that's to the territories, the states, and also the tribes. And a few years ago, I think it was back in maybe 2015, 2014, around in that, might have been a little earlier than that, 2011, someplace after that point, HHS really started to emphasize trauma-informed programming. And while this was always considered, we then began to use some new language. And so as we're looking at developing grant applications for FIPSA, then we want to make sure we're looking at trauma-informed, evidence-based strategies that we can assist the Black community in. All right, resource centers. FIPSA funds all of these different resource centers, which would include, as you see, UGMA. We are funded to provide culturally specific services to the Black community. And on that list, you'll also see the National Latinx Now Network for Healthy Families and Communities that's in St. Paul. They focus on the Latinx community. You'll see one for the Asian Pacific community, Asian Pacific and Islander community, one for them. We see many others that are there as well. And as programs, you have accessibility to all of those national resource centers. So just as Ujima is saying, call us and we can help you, you can call any of those technical assistance agencies for support as well. And the National Hotline is also funded by FIPSA. And those are a couple of sites for you. So FIPSA, you know, how did I go back to that? FIPSA provides all of those sources of funds or those purposes of funding that you can reach. So please make sure you identify who your state administrator is. And once you've identified that person, make contact with them. The other organization that's in FIPSA, rather that's in the government, that we provide a lot of, that provides a lot of services for our community is the Office on Violence Against Women. And the Office on Violence Against Women was started with a, with the VAWA, with Violence Against Women Act. And in fact, Karma, Condencia Braid, myself, Luz, we were all very instrumental in working on some aspects of this over the course of many years. And so in 1994 was when the legislation passed for VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. And there are many different sections to it. It actually established OVW. And there are 4 formula grants. So just as we talked about with FIPSA, having formula grants and discretionary grants, there are four formula grants that are in OVW, and there are 15 different discretionary grants. And all of these grants do the same thing in helping us to increase our capacity to provide services. One of the grants, one of the formula grants that's in OVW is called the STOP Formula Grants, a formula grant program. And there is money that's in STOP. Again, you can apply through your state administrator for OVW, which could or may not be the same state administrator for FIPSA. Sometimes they're the same. I'm in Michigan. FIPSA and OVW have the same state administrator, but that doesn't necessarily have to ring true for all states. So you should get to know who your STOP state administrator is also. Formula grants here are the same as in FIPSA. It's a formula. In other words, the size of your state, population, different things like that determine how much money you're going to get in this award program. And in this Formula Stop program, 30% of the funds that are there are to provide services for victims in your community. And of that 30%, 10% must be distributed to culturally specific community-based organizations. So that doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. So particularly, you have to think about the fact that if you're in a small state and your formula grant is a small amount, and then we're only talking about 30% being directed for specific victim services, and 10% of that 30% lessens that amount being directed for culturally specific communities. So get to know who your administrator is, find out how those funds are being used, see maybe how your communities can collaborate and help to provide some direction on how those funds should be used. And the other part of the allocation, though, there are funds that are going to law enforcement, there are funds that are going to prosecutors, and so there definitely are, you know, the funds are not just intended for victim services. And you have to remember that OVW is in the Office of Justice Programs. So it's in the Department of Justice. And so the way that the Department of Justice looks at it is more in how do we ensure systems are collaborating, participating with the way in which we're trying to stop violence in our community. And there, OVW is looking at accountability as being one of the things that they're trying to enforce, as well as services and support to victims. And so we have to look from both of those perspectives as we look at how we're going with it. Whether or not that will change in the future, we don't know. OVW has funding specifically for sexual assault services. And in fact, OVW was the first funding stream to identify this critical need for sexual assault services for victims. And so that was really an opportunity for us to recognize the level of sexual assault and rape that's in each of our communities, and how to figure out how to get direct funding from those dollars. And so direct grant funds to states and territories to assist them in supporting rape crisis centers and other nonprofit, non-governmental organization or tribal programs that provide services. So these are direct funds. These are still funds going to the state, because this is the second of our formula grants. They go to the states, but then the state disperses in subgrantees the money directly to provide those services. Culturally specific program. This is one that, and when I mentioned that Karma, Luz, Condencia Braid, and myself were very involved in trying to work on issues of VAWA, we were very active at this point in time when this was included later into VAWA, because we found that while money was put into VAWA, that money was not reaching the Black community or other culturally specific communities, that it was still being held by mainstream programs. And so this was an initiative to say, we need to be able to serve our own communities. We have a right and we have a need to provide services to our own communities. And so we helped to initiate through the VAWA task force, a pot of money, a program that was specifically for culturally specific programs, that should target culturally specific programs. Now, what we really were trying to say was racialized programs. We were not trying to say culture in this big word, with this meaning anybody who has culture. These funds were intended to go to the African American or the Black community, to the Asian community, to the Latina community. Those funds were intended to go to those communities in order for us to address the issue of violence. And they were intended not to go to states, because we found that our programs were having a difficult time in getting money from the states, because they had been so fixed on who they were already funding that communities of color were not getting funding on the same level. And so that's what happened. So these funds can be accessed directly from OVW through a grant program, and you do not have to go to the state to acquire. We also created this underserved program through VAWA. And so that's a broader audience that it serves, but it does include communities of color, but it also includes specifically gender identity issues, the LGBTQ community. In fact, at one point, and I'm not sure where it is right now, but at one point that you can, they had closed down all other programs in getting money, and they wanted to dedicate some money to the LGBTQ community in order to have accessibility to those funds. But that did not mean that communities of color, LGBTQ populations, could not apply. You were also able to apply. So these underserved by religion or sexual orientation, all of those different things would be another pot of money that's available. Sexual assault services, culturally specific program, another culturally specific program that was opened up in OVW the same way, for you to get direct funds and not go through the state. And you can actually get both sexually assault services, culturally specific program. You can apply for that, and you can apply for any of the other ones as well. So just because you apply for one does not exclude you from applying or receiving grant funds from the other. Rural programs. Traditionally, this is not so much thought of as being something for the Black community, but Black folk live in rural America and should be looking at the rural program for accessibility, for having services in your community as well, because this is an area where we know that the rural community has some more specific dynamics about how people, what people need to do in order to be safe. And even being a person of color in a rural community and being more isolated, what other types of harms could there be? What is the distance and you're being able to get to a hospital, to get to a shelter, and those kinds of things. So again, as you're looking for funding, rural programs could be another one. The disability program, Black folk are disabled, and we should also make sure we're considering how to apply in that area for funds. State and territorial coalition programs, while that's something that individual programs can't apply for, those are established, those are set up, just as in FIPSA, those are already established, okay? And transitional housing is another one that you could look at applying for, providing culturally specific services, providing transitional housing units in your community for culturally specific communities of color. Abuse in later life, yes, we also get old and suffer from domestic violence and sexual assault. And these programs in OVW, I should add, include those 4 types of programs: domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence. And improving the criminal justice response. Now, this is a program where a lot of these funds go to systems. But a lot of times what systems will do is partner with local communities. So if your police department has a improving criminal justice response grant, they may want to partner with you to be a liaison in their facility, or better yet, partner with you to be in the community and an advocate for your community as you're working with them. And there's a difference between working in a police station and being a member of the police department and being a separate program providing services outside of the criminal justice system because of all confidentiality issues and things like that. So you want to make sure you're aware of those limitations. The legal assistance program, you are open to apply for those grants as well. So just because it doesn't say culturally specific in here does not mean you are not entitled to and eligible for all of those funds. I think that's good. And also OVW administers a technical assistance program where there are individual organizations that you can go to get training and support. And many times, some of those organizations, a lot of those organizations are the same organizations for culturally specific programs that are in FIPSA. So as you look at the Asian, the Latina, the Native American, the Black communities, then generally those are the same programs that are funded in both. Not always. Okay. So do we have any questions that you'd like to ask regarding those 2 particular grant programs? And again, you don't want to put all of your faith in those 2 programs. There are many different programs federally that you can apply for. There's also foundations and individual community programs and churches and other accessibility to fund development that you should look at, but those are 2. Any questions that I can answer?
Yes, I've got a question. This is James Maddox in Pasadena, California.
Yes.
Let me preface it with I'm new to this business. I'm a brand new social worker. And so I'm looking at this from I will admit, a jaundiced view. In California, it seems as though the funding is all based on these folks who've been around for a while, and they all seem to know one another, and the money keeps getting cut up into these pots. And so I'm a member of California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, CalCASA. I go to the Domestic Violence Council meetings. I used to go to them when they were held in Los Angeles County. And what struck me is that it seems to be a population, or the people who are getting the money all seem to know one another, and they take care of one another. And Black folks get dealt from the bottom of the deck, if at all. Now, I recognize that that's probably a pretty harsh statement, and recognize I'm new to this business. So I'm still looking at it from a business standpoint. But every time I go to these meetings or listen to the meetings, and I appreciate what you've been providing, what rings in my ear when I hear about the funding and they send out emails about funding is words from Malcolm X. And that is, you've been took, you've been had, you've been misled. But I really appreciate the information you provided. And this fact that 50% of the money goes to law enforcement and prosecutors. And to be frank, in Los Angeles County, they ain't doing the job. But they all seem to be talking to one another, and they're sitting around patting each other on the back. So the agencies and the cops and the prosecutors are all saying, we're doing such a great job because we've been around so long. Anyway, I don't know if that's a question or so much a statement. And I'm a policy guy, so I haven't found a pot I couldn't stir. On the back of my card, I have a modification of something from Finley Peter Dunne, which is to comfort the afflicted and to unmercifully afflict the comfortable.
Okay, I like that. So first of all, and regardless question or statement, I'd like to respond. So prosecutors and law enforcement don't get 50% of that money, but they do get a percentage of different pots of that money, but not all of those pots of the money. And then to really just support your analysis. I don't think your analysis of the way that the money has been distributed in the past is incorrect, which is why we have some of these types of webinars and community awareness campaigns to make communities aware of how the money is being spent, who's getting what money, and what we can do to change that. When we participated with OVW and looking at, not OVW, but with VAWA and looking at new legislative programs. Greta also has been very instrumental in that, and looking at new legislative programs and putting the money in specifically for communities of color. It was because of what you just said. It was clear that there was an old girls, old boys network, and money was just going year to year to the same people and increasing to the same people. Different pots were established. The money was going to the same people. And that was, one of the ways in which we've looked to intervene on that strategy and correct it. And another strategy is to make our communities aware that these other pots of money, just because they don't say communities of color, does not mean that we are not entitled to apply for those funds. And so we are entitled to apply for those funds. And that what we need to do is to look and see how communities of color, particularly on this conversation, the Black population, can provide those services in their own specific communities. But yes, I absolutely agree. And the strategy of why we are holding this and why this is so important is so we will ensure that this money will be distributed in different ways.
Thank you. I will have to say that thank you for letting me know that there is a FAFSA state administrator, because he or she is going to hear from me tomorrow. Because I got to know who my person is, because you got to talk to me. I'm very polite. Don't worry, I won't use any bad language, but I will be very assertive and finding out. I want to know. I want to go to the party.
Right.
And we've been dealt out of the deck too long.
Right. So I appreciate everyone for participating with me. I know I held you a little longer than we intended to for today, and I apologize for that. But I do definitely want to thank you for staying with us, and I'll turn it over to Miss Greta.
So, hi, everybody. I apologize. I've had to go in and out today in addition to work. I am a single mom with my 2 boys here, so it is crazy town all the time. One, I want to say thank you so much for being here, for participating. Everything that we do is like the most thankless job we have probably ever had, if this isn't the only job you've ever had. And I want to say thank you for all that you do on a daily basis. We know that the job is hard. The work is unforgiving. It will never kiss you back. That's what my mentors have always told me. But we continue to do the work because we care. And during the time of COVID and racial justice, it's incredibly difficult to not only take care of others, but to take care of ourselves and our own families. So just you all being here and showing up and participating in the ways that you have yesterday and today, we're super appreciative. Our team is amazing. Best team I've ever worked with. We're here at your service. We are not 24/7, but we're pretty close. So you'll be getting more information from us after this, and hopefully a composite of all of the regional meetings that we've held now that we've completed that task. And, come see us on our social media, check us out, call us, write us. Email is probably the best way to reach us. If you have any other issues, worries, fears, or concerns, we are here for you. And so, James, when you reach out to your state administrator, if you're not getting the information or the treatment that you think that you need or the answers that you need, call us back. Let us tag team with you, right? So, and I know Karma, if she was able to close you out, would just say, thank you so much. We value you. We appreciate you. Take care of yourselves. We always are so good about training about self-care, and we're the worst hypocrites. We never do it. So please do. We hope you've made some friends. The chat has been super active, which is good to see. And just be well, be safe, and know that you have us out here fighting the fight for you. And with that, get out of here. Go do something fun.
Question.
Sure.
Is there a list of the people who've been on the chat that you're going to submit? Not just where they're located geographically, and also copies of the PowerPoints?
Sure. I think, and I will let Sahida answer, I think we should be putting a compendium together of all who have participated and or the highlights and the PowerPoints and talking points. But you got to give us a little bit of time to push that out, right, Sahida?
Yes.
Okay.
Tomorrow's fine.
On our website.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
No
that's
rush.
not happening. But
Thank you.
I wish you all well. Thank you. And Umi, thank you. And to our team, you're amazing. Love you. And I really wish I was going to get to see you. Tony, did you have something to say, or you were just saying thumbs up?
Yeah, just thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
That's wonderful. Thank all of you.
We'll meet again. We'll meet again. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.